Hey, I'm James Thornock. Welcome to the Coder Kids podcast. Today, we have another guest on the show. We're going to be talking about education primarily today, which not uncommon of a topic for this podcast. Guest that we have on the show today is Colin O'Neill. He is the head of school at St. Thomas the Apostle Episcopal School, so quite a mouthful there. He has a master's degree in neuroscience and education, a level 5 mustache, and just a lot of experience in education, generally speaking. So welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So normally the first question we ask guests is, how did you get interested in technology? But I'll change it a little bit and say, what helped you to decide to be a teacher? There's a bit of a minority among male colleagues to be teachers in general, and it's not looked at as like the pinnacle of like job market success if you're a teacher.
Sure.
So why don't you go through kind of your logic, your thought process, and then we'll move from there.
Yeah. So I got in through teaching kind of not haphazardly, but it wasn't what I set out to do. I went through psychology undergrad, and around my junior year, I fell in love with neuroscience. I had a mentor professor who was kind of the department's lead neuroscience researcher. And I discovered how to really foster my love of brain research. So as I took more and more courses, I kept thinking, this is what I want to go do, is get into neuroscience research. And then, I did some lab work. I did some training and discovered that I like it. It's interesting. It's fun, but I need that human interaction with people to really be fulfilled. And, there are definitely clinics where you can do that. But a lot of time, especially in the build up to, doing neuroscience, like getting your PhD, you're spending a lot of time in those labs, a lot of just you in the room. And so I was also looking for something that might give me that human connection. I also needed a job.
And so yeah, what a wonderful motivator.
Right. And so when it came time to graduate, I had applied for Teach for America.
Okay.
And I didn't know what it's really difficult to get in. I was there were not a lot of people at that time from my university. It wasn't like the pipeline into Teach for America that some other larger universities are. Like just up the street was UT Austin. They have a lot of people up there.
Yeah.
But when I applied, only 3 people from my university had ever gotten in. So I was like, I don't know if I can put all my eggs in that basket. It's not going to be a sure thing. And I'd also applied for this internship over the summer to do, pardon me. I applied for this internship over the summer to do lab research and basically just get, more training, more time in the lab, and hoping that might lead to a lab technician job that I could work for a couple of years so I could apply to graduate school and then kind of go up that way. I was amazed that I got accepted into both, and wow. I decided that, I felt like the lab was always something that I could return to, but, being a teacher and really doing some good in the world, Teach for America's mission, is to ensure that all children one day have access to an equally amazing education. And so I felt that calling to go. I came down here to Houston to be a teacher. I did my first year as a 3rd grade self-contained teacher in HISD. So I was an elementary school teacher.
Yeah.
And my journey just kind of went from there. I stayed in education. I really fell in love with the craft of teaching. I'd actually had some experience working with kids when I was in all throughout high school and university. I was a martial arts instructor. And so I loved that aspect of like working with kids and like being, being that kind of coach for them, and seeing that I'd had a lot of students that I'd had for many years and seeing them grow and get better and better. And that was really fulfilling work. And then seeing how that played out in the classroom was really cool. many years later, after several years in the classroom and doing some work doing curriculum design, I found this neuroscience and education program, and I was able to kind of marry my two passions, and that was a great experience. And I think that's been where I've really focused my career on. Maybe not so much in the day to day, but just in everything I try to do. I can speak the language of neuroscience, which is not a comfortable language for a lot of people to speak.
Right.
And I can speak the language of education, and trying to connect those two worlds is something I'm really excited to do, and I'm really passionate about, and that I try to bring into my work. So that was kind of my journey. I went through an alternative certification program, so it was not a traditional educator in that way, but I'm a big fan of alternative cert programs for people who were like me and maybe didn't start off thinking you were going to be an educator, but you get into it anyway, and you can bring the strengths of your background, whether it's like computer science or, with my psychology background, I knew a lot about child development, right?
Sure.
So I didn't necessarily have the pedagogy, but I could learn those skills and take what I knew about cognitive development and child development and bring that into the classroom too. So.
All right, Piaget, here we go. Yeah, no,
yeah.
Well, that is really great. I actually did an alternative certification program myself, and that was actually knowing from the get-go. I did that on purpose because I thought I'd get a better bang for my buck, and I could do it a little bit quicker. And I'd heard some horror stories about a certain college of education that I may or may not have avoided. And them like delaying classes and posting them super late. And everybody I knew in that college of education, they had like great classes, but just administratively, systematically, everybody I knew in that program got delayed by 6 months to a year and a half of their life because they couldn't get the class that they needed, and their schedule was wide open in every case. And I thought, I don't have that kind of time to waste. And so I did a philosophy minor and history major, actually. So to be a history teacher. So that's, listeners may know that, but I don't know that little secret about avoiding a college of education when I knew I was going to be a teacher. Amazing professors. I heard great things about the professors and the classes. I don't want to throw any shade, but it's just like the Oracle registration software needs to die. So I will die on that hill.
Right.
It's old. It's cantankerous. It's compatible with all universities, which is why it stays around. But good times. Yeah, I'm a fan of alternative certification programs as well. Although I imagine we're going to be talking a little bit about private schools, which don't necessarily require you to be certified. So, I have some questions about that, but I also wanted to say Jeff Ward, who founded Coder Kids, on oh my goodness, Cinco de Mayo 2016. So almost that'd be 5 years, right? So
coming up on a 5-year anniversary.
Yeah, so that is really exciting. And it's a really easy date to remember in Houston. He was in Teach for America. He applied and he did it for a long time, more like 8 years. So he's stuck with it quite a bit, and then got a little bit burnt out and wanted to still make a difference, doing something a little bit different. And so that's when he started Coder Kids, and that's what it's been from now on. So very interesting.
I think that's really important to get into, right? Is that and I went through a journey where I was in the classroom, and I needed a break after probably 4 or 5 years, and I was able to step out and write curriculum. I worked for it's now called Accelerate Learning, but at the time it was the STEM Scopes program. I think they still go by STEM Scopes actually within Texas, and then nationally they're Accelerate Learning. There was writing STEM curriculum, and I really loved that work. And I did that for a couple of years while they were developing their middle school program, and I also worked for their high school biology right out, because I taught biology for a little bit. So I was a science teacher. I did that 1 year in third grade, and then I taught science from there on out. but it's really just about. It's great when we can get people like high quality teachers staying in the classroom.
Oh yeah,
and that's a huge need. And the education space is really big, and the whole field just needs to be fueled by people who are passionate for connecting kids to really positive experiences. And
instead of just having a high tolerance for bureaucracy, right?
Right.
Which is like also very much required. So
you also that, yeah.
I love what you did there. Like you're implying that we're like high quality and that you need to keep us in there. I don't, I was definitely a teacher in 7th grade. I think I was decent quality. But yeah, you're right. There are a lot of really good teachers, really good people, and they move on to where they're respected and valued. And
Yes.
and that is an unfortunate reality of part of the untold part of education.
Right.
Yeah, that's tough, man. So many questions. We could go in probably a million different directions. I have one kind of a broad question. You've been in a lot of different types of schools at this point. And we're talking public school and HISD, right? So listeners are either in Houston or are familiar with Houston by now. HISD is the biggest school district in Texas. It's massive. It's got like what, almost 300 schools? Do you know?
Yeah, I don't know the number. I mean, because it gets bigger every year.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've got in the area. We've got Houston ISD. It's one of the biggest in the country too. It's not, but definitely, not the biggest, but it's in, I think, definitely the top 10, right? Fort Bend ISD is also really big. That's nearby.
Yeah, we partner with Fort Bend, so I'm a little bit more familiar with them. Okay, so we have. I just looked it up. I'm cheating, people. Okay,
I was looking it up too.
They have.
I wanted to know.
214,175 students. Try 214,000. I'm like, my brain is really, really, really hurting. How many can fit in Energy Stadium? How many people?
Oh, that's a good question too.
I have good questions. I don't always have answers, but
what's the capacity?
I feel like you're playing the Jimmy role in the Joe Rogan.
They say 72,220 is the capacity, so they could fill up NRG Stadium. I can't do that.
Twice and some. Yeah, twice and then some, yeah. So that's wild. And those are just the kids. So then the staff, just teachers, right? Just teachers, 11,909. So that's a little bit more fathomable, but still unfathomable. And then staff, like not teachers, 28,652.
Yeah.
And that number I have a question about. But like, why are there more than double the amount of staff that there are teachers? That starts to get like real fishy real quick. They're literally almost 16,000, definitely 15,000 more staff than teachers. So anyway, so I'll let you take a crack at the original question that I had, and then maybe we can throw some more shade. But I always say this, but look, if you're a teacher, if you're taking offense to that, know that I criticize systems a lot, but not people, not individual teachers, unless there's like legitimate abuse going on. Most teachers give it their heart and soul. They go through quite a bit. They deal with a lot of red tape and bureaucracy, and they really actually want what's best for their kids. I mean, and I've been inside of schools and all kinds of schools, and that's what I find. That is the vast majority of cases. But I do think we're going to talk about systems today and maybe potential optimizations. So my question to you is, you've been in public schools, private schools, charter schools. So the 3 different types of schools we have in America, I suppose you can include homeschool in there as well. What have you learned from each? What are some strengths of each? If they all have strengths, I'm assuming here.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
And yeah, so just go for it.
So I think, so I started off in public school, and I was a public school kid. Like, I went through public schools. And I grew up in, kind of a smaller town in central Texas going through a public school system where there wasn't school choice, right? So we kind of all, if you lived in a certain area, we all went to that elementary school. And then all the elementary schools is just based on geography and how close you are. And all those feed into one middle school, and those all feed in, or I think there were like 2 middle schools in the greater area. And then both those middle schools fed into one high school. And it was huge. And so when I moved down to Houston and started teaching in a much bigger district where, even within the district, there were things like magnet programs.
Yeah.
Where kids could apply, and there were these things where people could move around. I didn't have a schema for that. Like, what do you mean? You can pick where you're going to high school. That was a brand new concept for me. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the benefits, though, of our public education system, even within a large district. And the size does make things really kind of monolithically challenging. Because you're talking about just moving progress for hundreds of thousands of kids by creating change through tens of thousands of employees and staff, right? And that's a really hard thing to do.
Yeah.
But I think one of the benefits of that scale is that we do have programs. There is room and there is funding for people to say, hey, we're going to have a school like a science magnet or a school.
There's the Mandarin Immersion School in HISD. There's Garden Oaks Montessori magnet.
Exactly.
There are a couple I know of, yeah.
Trade schools and things that can really help give kids a focus on hey, if you kind of see what trajectory you're wanting to explore, we can do that, or in the very least provide this enriching environment for you where you're challenged. There's a really good book. It's an older book, but I think it's still relevant today. It's called Tinkering Toward Utopia. And it kind of tracks the history of public education in the United States. And I think we owe it to that system to just acknowledge like the sheer magnitude of what has been accomplished. Like, our public education system is ripe with problems, don't get me wrong. At the same time, we have also created a system that by and large educates the vast majority of people who go through it to be functionally fluent readers, minimally proficient in mathematics and arithmetic. We do accomplish these things that, like, from a history standpoint, right? Like, think of another point in history where millions of people were as educated as they are today, and you can't find one.
Yeah, that's right.
And that started about 100 years ago. Going back into my grandfather on my mom's side had an 8th grade education because that's as high as school went where he grew up.
Sure.
And so if that was what was in place 2 generations ago, we can only get better. We got to get better. We definitely got to get better. But we're continuing to get better, and making that access to that education. And it's an ongoing fight, right? But to be equitable. What drew me to Teach for America, and what I think is great about programs like that, is the mission to make sure that, like, hey, kids who are growing up in underserved, underprivileged communities where the average income is at or below the poverty line. Sure. And we've got way too many kids living in poverty in the United States. And that creates a lot of stress on that system. And I think that's where a lot of the problems stem from, is that, the system is not designed to be the solution to all of these, the negative impacts of poverty.
Yeah,
it's not designed to be the solution for that. It's designed to just educate the average person and make sure that they kind of get like a bare minimum, threshold of reading, writing, math, and sciences and civics and things like that.
Yeah.
And it still does that. But then you've got all these other layers of complexity that get added. But to go back to your original question, though, I think the thing that I learned from public school is that there are some really amazing things that can happen at scale. And there are some really amazing things that when when you have the right people in the room, like people who are staying in the classroom. I mean, some of the best teachers I've ever worked with are 15, 20, 30-year veterans of public schools, because they have that passion for it, and that's
Sure.
what keeps them there, and that they weather the ups and downs of testing and curriculum changes and things like that, and they just continue to be lifelong learners themselves and to lead with their passions. And and I think, like, with the charter school movement, a lot of that was also born out of this desire to serve communities that were not historically served well by the public education system. And I've seen, just like with the public schools, there are places where that's happening really, really well. There are places where that's happening not so well. And it's just, it's a huge ecosystem of schools. Private schools, I've had a lot more exposure in the later part of my career into private. I am now the head of a private school, which is not something when I first set out that I ever thought would be the case for me. But I came here because what it afforded me was the ability to be free to create a space for the kind of learning that I think needs to exist, that I think is really best and very powerful for kids. I love working with my teachers and liberating them in ways that they feel very passionate about the work that they do, and that they're continuing to learn. Just this morning, we did some egg drops.
Okay.
We did those. We had our kindergartners, I think our third graders, and our fifth graders were out there, and we did it not because it was aligned to a standard or it was in kind, but we just happened to be like fixing some lights, and we had access to this lift that was going to be around for a few days, and we just thought, hey, wouldn't it be kind of cool and kind of fun to do this? And we know the kids will learn something, right? They did. They tinkered and they experimented and they changed their designs, and it was just fun.
Yeah.
It was just a lot of fun, and we're not.
For those parents, just if no one's ever heard of an egg drop test or whatever before, it's essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Colin, but basically it's an engineering problem where you will use an egg and then maybe minimal additional resources like straws or paper or something, and to either cushion the fall or create a structure where the egg resists cracking, right? You're trying to get it not to crack or get it as high up as possible before it cracks, right? So there are different ways to do it, different modifications that you can have, whether the materials you're using with it, but the egg is the thing, and it is pretty fun when it cracks too, because there's that like pop, and there's a little bit of anxiety, and it's a lot of fun, right? So that's what that is for those parents who are uninitiated in the egg dropping on purpose, right? We all have done it in the kitchen unintentionally. But anyway, so go on.
Yeah, so we but I think that it was experiences like that really brought me here and keep me here. We have a lot of fun. The kids have a lot of fun. I've got skin in the game. My own kid goes to school here, and just watching him kind of, he has a spark. I mean, every parent thinks their kids
Oh,
yeah.
Every parent that calls in, they're like, my kid is actually especially smart. Can I bump him up to the next grade level? I'll normally say yes, because what am I going to say? No, your kid's dumb.
Yeah.
And honestly, most of the kids that take our courses are really intelligent. And part of me thinks that's because either smart kids are attracted to coding, or just because kids on average are pretty smart. And that we're underestimating kids in general. So.
No, and that's one of the things that I think is really important. What that I've learned, just in my journey through education and seeing thousands of kids in many different schools all over the city and the state and the country, and is that the human brain is incredibly remarkable and adaptable. It is the most complex biological construct in the known universe. There are as many, or there are more connections in the brain, synaptic connections to one another. So, the cells, like, I know we've got a video, so I can kind of gesture, right?
Right.
If you're listening to this, I'll do my best. If you're watching it, you're in luck. So I'm holding my fingers really close together, but not touching, because that kind of mimics what brain cells do. And that space in between them is called a synapse. And there are multiple synapses on one cell to another. So two cells could have many places where they overlap and don't quite touch. And there are more of those connections in the human brain than there are stars in our galaxy. And there are as many stars in the galaxy as there are grains of sand on a beach. So if you think about like how dense that is, and how I think it speaks to the complexity of the thing and the resilience of the human mind to solve a lot of problems. I think most people can do most things. And I think most kids can learn how to do most things if they're set up for success, if they're set up. So I think what you're seeing, speaks to your program, in that if you're seeing a lot of success with kids, because coding is not an easy skill to learn. I remember I got my first.
There are levels, but yeah, you're right.
It's. I remember trying to learn HTML back in the day, because that was sort of what you learned in high school coding class.
Right.
And it was challenging, and it requires a lot of patience and persistence. And you can be as smart as all get out, but if you don't have those pieces there, you're still not going to become proficient at it. And so, some kids are smarter than others, the same way that some adults are more intelligent than other adults. Smart people come from smart kids. But it is generally true that most people can learn to do most things. And if the conditions are right, and you have that persistence, you have that tenacity and the drive, and you feel supported, you have that supportive environment from your teacher, from your instructor, then you're going to be successful, and you're going to really feel that. Is every kid going to go through like a coding class and grow up to design the next Minecraft, or one day virtual reality, like some sort of Ready Player One simulated world kind of a thing? No, they're not going to all go do that. And it's still a skill that they can learn, and is valuable to learn and expose them to, because it helps them understand the world a lot better. So that when they look at a computer program, they're going to have some idea of like, there's some stuff going on that goes into that. And I understand a little bit of it. I don't need to be an expert in it, but I'm familiar with the thing.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And you mentioned a couple of things that I want to dig into a little bit deeper. You said they've got a good teacher who nurtures a good environment. Forgive me if I'm butchering your words. You also posted on LinkedIn recently, or I'm not sure if it was recently, but one of your last posts that said that play is a right. So
Yeah.
rights and responsibilities, that's always hot in the culture. What's a right? Is healthcare a right? Is sleep a right? Is speech a right? Guns, is that a right that we should focus on? So when you talk about right, are you talking negative right? Are you talking positive right? Like,
No, I think,
so if you could define the word right, I know that's a little bit esoteric, but then also play and what you can do to foster play. And then also, goodness, how many questions are packed into this question? And then also, neurologically, why is play important?
Absolutely. So I think starting the last question there, like why is play important, is really connected to this idea of play as a fundamental right.
Okay.
And so I define it that way, is that play is a fundamental right of children to have. I think it should be a fundamental right for adults. We need to play too, but we're talking about kids, and I think it's easier for most people to kind of wrap their head around the idea that kids need to play. Sure. And we know they need to play it seems very intuitive, like kind of a common sense. Well, of course, but kids play all the time. Like, what do you mean it's a right? But it is. We have to protect that. There are, in this age of standardized testing, there are a lot of spaces where kids don't get to go outside for recess, just unstructured. We are opening the doors, out you go. I'm not in charge of what you do. Don't hit each other and play nice, but go play.
Yeah.
And it's that unstructured time where incredible learning happens. Because what kids neurologically, like what they have to do as they're developing, the brain is a sense-making organ. It helps us form these more and more complex constructs about the world around us. And there are a lot of subtleties in that learning that it's really you couldn't sit a child down and explicitly teach them in a lot of ways because they just wouldn't absorb it. They wouldn't learn it that way. But if they're playing, they get the lesson. Sharing is a good example of that, right? Like, we want kids to share. And I without going on too much of a tangent, I think a lot of adults do way too much intervention around kids sharing. But when we want kids to share, they learn to do that by being in a group of other kids where they have something that they want and other kids want it too. Mm-hmm. And then they have to make that decision. Okay, hey, my friend James wants to play with this, but I'm playing with it. I don't want to share it. I want to keep playing. Well, I'll get some sort of feedback from that from you, right? Well, my friend James gets mad and storms out, and now he's gone, and maybe I feel some kind of way about that. Like, well, I miss my friend. He's back. Okay, I'll share the truck with you. Come on back.
Yeah.
And maybe I recruit you to come back, and then I share my thing, and I'm happier because now my friend's there with me, and I learned that lesson of like, oh, okay, sometime now maybe you play that hand too much, and then I also learn, okay, well, sometimes James just storms off when I don't share, and I don't really miss him that much. I really kind of wanted to play with this, and so I'm just going to do that. He's sort of pulling that card every time he wants what I have, but I really want this, and I learned that way.
Yeah.
You couldn't design a lesson that did that as powerfully as that naturally occurring moment that the two kids, that social emotional learning where they have to grapple with this other entity, this other mind, and sort of work with that relationship. And those kinds of things, they're nearly impossible to structure from an adult perspective because we don't see the world the way that they do. They need to occur naturally. This happens in old, that example maybe sounded like a younger child, like maybe a 4 or 5 year old, right? But we see this with older kids too. When 9 and 10 year olds are learning how to control their emotions a little bit tighter than they could when they were younger. They're learning things like this comes up in PE a lot. It's this weird dynamic socially where if you're in PE class and you're playing a game, maybe you're just still out at recess and you're just playing a game of pick up like dodgeball or whatever kids are, and they invent their own games, but they're on two different teams. It's like, okay, well, I'm against this other team, but only so much, right? I'm not against you as a human being because you're still my friend and we're playing together. Maybe tomorrow or the next round, you're going to be on my team. So I'm not like against you. I'm not out to like get you and end you, but I'm competitive against you. I want my team to win. So I'm going to cheer for my team. But I also have to learn that lesson of like, I can't boo your team and be too anti you. So this is a very subtle, like social interaction and dynamic that the kids have to learn and they have to navigate. And most kids learn this pretty naturally. Now, sometimes kids really have a hard time navigating these things, and then they do need some explicit coaching kind of after the fact that it happens to sort of learn, all right, here's where I need to fit into it. But all of this happens because of play. All of the, if we want, at our school, I really emphasize the 21st century learning approach, which is like, you want outcomes like critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity. We're an Episcopal school. We had compassion as our 5th C. But like, if you want kids to learn collaboration, yes, you need to build that into the curriculum, right? Mm-hmm. You also have to create spaces for them at school for them to collaborate organically, just on their own.
Right.
Whether it's teaming up, we've got this tree that's kind of bent over at an arc out on the playground, and the kids love going back there. They build little forts back there, and that's a natural moment for them to collaborate. And so when I say like play is a right, what I think I really mean by that is that to preserve that right for kids means that we need to, as a mandate, professionally, we are obliged to create spaces for kids to be able to play during the day at school.
Okay.
My kids, we're one and done. He doesn't have like a sibling to go home and play with.
Okay.
And he's a really extroverted kid. Like, he needs to be out there playing with other kids. School is his space to do that.
Sure.
And, when kids are kind of captive in schools, for lack of a better word, for 8 hours or more a day. And if we're not creating those spaces for play, not only are we doing them a huge disservice, but I think we are violating this fundamental right that they have to play because it is part of their natural and healthy development.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to repeat back a little bit of what you said, you're framing this right as a negative right. In other words, something that shouldn't be taken away. It's not something that is given to kids. It's something that kids innately have, that they need to innately experience, and that they will organically, chaotically, naturally experience, unless it is like, I don't want to, maybe I do want to use this word, robbed from them, right?
Yeah.
And, by whatever it's, it could be.
No, it can be robbed. And so in that same thing, I kind of talk about this vignette. I talk about with my teaching staff. It made a huge impression on me as a first-year teacher. I had my cohort of kids that I was teaching were behind academically where we would want them to be, right? Like, the average reading level in my class was somewhere around a 1.4 at the beginning of the year. So these are third graders reading as if they're only a few months into first grade.
Okay.
And there are educators, unfortunately, and many of them are in leadership positions. I think a lot of boots on the ground teachers know better, but there are a lot of leaders that have the tendency to look at a cohort like that and say, well, if you're really behind in reading, what's the answer? More reading.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is, learning doesn't necessarily work that way, right? You have to have time to just breathe and be happy and be joyful and experience other parts of your life, so that when it comes time to reading, you've got the capacity in yourself to do it, especially if it's very difficult. So I took my kids out for recess nearly every day. And my principal at the time would just scowl at me for doing this. I got in a lot of trouble for it. And it was an uphill battle that I had to fight every single week. Because
can I ask, are you talking about in the context of the whole school day, or are you talking about in terms of like a class period? Because at that age, it's like you have it for the whole day, right?
Yeah. I was self-contained. It was just me and 23 kids for the whole day.
Okay, I'm trying to think. Okay, so yeah, 23 kids, you got them all day. What's the amount of time allocated for lunch in that scenario? And do they have any recesses in the school, or don't they? Or
No, so the recess time was encouraged for us to build into our schedule, but then you were sort of told hey, you don't need to be doing recess. You need to be doing more math and reading drills.
So you're saying they didn't have any time allocated for recess during the day?
Well, that was up to me as the teacher, right? And so I allocated that time. I did that. It wasn't built into the structure of the school. They would go for lunch for 30 minutes, and then they would come back to the class, and being self-contained, you kind of do whatever it is you're going to do. So I took my kids out.
Yeah, because when I originally read it on I read what you said there.
Yeah.
In that post, I was thinking this guy's taking them out for recess every class period. And I was like, I'm glad he got criticized for it. But no, this context makes so much more sense. Yeah, just for context, okay? Many of you people who are our age or older may remember how much time you spent at recess. I actually read a book on recess and homework and some other things. And schools used to have a lot more of it, we'll just say, on average. So I had, oh man, this is digging really, really deep. But we had a 10-minute recess in the morning. We had I think it was like an hour and a half or 2 hour lunch. I think it was an hour and a half. It couldn't have been 2 hours. And then we had a 15-minute recess in the afternoon. And this was in an elementary school context, right? And we do all the things that you were talking about, kicking balls and, playing on the playground. And like, honestly, sometimes just laying on the grass and like looking up at the sky and thinking about nothing. And just like imagining things. And, when, Game Boys became a thing, I think I started doing that more than some of the more like organic play type things. But I mean, you're talking about, almost 2 hours where teachers were kind of there. They were observing the playground, but they weren't, I would say, interfering.
They're keeping everyone safe, but yeah, they're not interfering with the process. The kids kind of need to do their own thing.
And I would say, like, I remember the emotion. I don't remember a lot from my childhood. Okay, like, let's be honest. I don't know if a lot of people remember 95% of their childhood.
I have a lot of really, I've got a vivid memory of a lot of things from back then. But
well, that's good. I mean, he's the brain guy. We want him to, right? But for me, I don't remember a lot. But what I do remember is like living for like the clock, and like the whole class would just be like staring at the clock on the wall. Like, I can't wait till I can play kickball for like literally 10 minutes, which is just like 2 innings or something. And kids would play like so hard, and then they'd like rush back in the school like super stinky and like full of dirt, and like it was great. And the funny thing is, like, the teachers actually capitalized on that time after recess, because kids like were really calm.
Yeah,
they could focus, right? They actually learned better like immediately after like physical play. I don't know. And so I have some theories about that. I think maybe it has to do with just blood flow to the brain and oxygen to the brain. But can you speak to that?
Yeah. So
like,
so
what's their neural?
there are definitely like physiological processes that are going. Like if you are working out really hard, that is good for brain development, right? You get different growth factors that are released inside the brain that really help with memory formation, and they found that like learning kind of before right after you've done some something physically intense, you can kind of crystallize it. But I think a big part of it too is just what we call cognitive load, right? And if you think about your brain analogous to a muscle, it's not a muscle, but in this analogy, let's kind of think about your muscles doing some sort of workout. You've only got so much that you could exercise, your bicep. If you're doing like bicep curls or doing push-ups or something, there's only so many push-ups you can do. And after a while, you need to let your muscles rest. Your brain has the same thing for cognitive load. And you felt this as an adult on days where you're just doing really intensive, focused work, right? And then you get home, and then someone's like, "Hey, what do you want for dinner?" And you're just like, "I don't know how to think about that."
Yeah.
I've been thinking of like, let's someone else make that decision, and I will eat whatever, or because you're just brain dead, you're fried after that. And that's that cognitive load. You've been doing really intense focused work for a long time, and you need to rest, and play creates the space where that can happen. So that kids, when we think about reading or math or writing, these kinds of skills that take a long time to develop, it's really intense. And we're not always innately good at these things.
Mm-hmm.
And different kids have different strengths and weaknesses when it comes to, learning math or learning reading. Kids with, especially if they have some kind of learning disability. If you are dyslexic, reading's even harder to learn how to do. If you're dysgraphic, keeping track of your math work is a lot harder to do. So is writing. So there are a lot of things that go into child development that just set kids up to need a break, because children have not evolved to be quiet focus machines. They are like, watch them when they just go out and play. They are rambunctious, raucous, movement machines that want to play. It is what they have evolved to do. It's what they're designed to do. That's the nature of a child, is to play.
Yeah.
And what really good schools do well, in part, is to just meet the child where they are and create the spaces for them to be free to be kids. It's like what we have recess every day, every class, every day. We don't take recess away, because it's a right. So if you do something bad or naughty, like, you have a consequence, but you're also going out to recess, because you need that. You need to go burn off that energy and play. And good schools do that. They meet those kids where they're at, in the classroom as well, with content and doing things. I think, like, what's cool about your program, thinking about the Minecraft camp, is that like, kids love Minecraft. Minecraft is a space where they can play, they can build, they can design,
for sure,
whatever kind of like ridiculous thing they want in this virtual world. And you're just you're meeting them there and then facilitating it, right? And that's a far step from, like, when I first got exposed to coding, which is like, here's your workbook, you need to change this font to be red. So, like, okay, here's my bracket, font equals, and you're trying to get this kind of, and I was not interested in doing that at all.
Right.
And so I did not, I'm sad to say, I did not develop the passion for coding that maybe I could have if I was exposed to it in a more playful way.
So yeah, well, this is something I want to bring up, because I think this is something that you are, I don't know, something clicked in my head when you said that, and that is that there has to be we have to know what could be the possible result of something before we want to invest our time and energy into doing something. So something that I found really, really surprising, we've also had on the show people who have, been coders and, computer engineers at Apple and Amazon and YNAB and all sorts of companies. People who instantly took to this, like, in the 80s and early 90s, when it's tough. Like, no one was there to say, like, what you could do. But the common thread with these people that latched onto it wasn't that they're smarter than you, Colin, which is good. I mean, so you don't have to worry about that. It's the fact that they were able to discover what they could do, and they had the imagination and the time to be able to pursue that. And you could call that a form of play. And so
they can play with it. They can play with coding. Absolutely.
That's right. And so I don't know who told them, but in like every one of these interviews, it's exactly the same. Well, I thought, what if I could do this? And then they figured out they could do it. And then what if I could do this? And they figured out they could do it with computers. And so I think that's part of the addictive, positive feedback loop of computers, is like, well, if you can think about something in even an abstract way, there's a possibility that you can actually create said thing, even though it's digital and maybe not physical. And I think for a long time, for at least 15 years, there weren't a lot of good teachers that said, hey, did you know, like, you can actually build video games and you can actually make stories and use it as a medium for storytelling. And so I think in a lot of ways, without play, if those people, I'm thinking particularly about our recent, well, just literally every single one of them is an example of this, who is actually an engineer. Every single one of them had time after school to either play video games or to work on their parents' computer. And back then they were super, super rare and like 1,000 times more expensive. Okay.
Yeah.
At least 1,000 times more expensive than a Raspberry Pi Zero, which is literally $5. So, in that context, I'm not trying to like steal the show from here. I think it's important to play and let kids play, and obviously be chaotic and
yeah,
burn energy and all that stuff. But I think it's also interesting to give them a reason to play, or just possibilities. So, especially the more rebellious types like myself,
yeah,
I really couldn't care less what adults said about like the reason for doing something, unless I was actually interested in it. So pay attention to the likes and the needs of your students,
absolutely.
but also to say like, hey, what are you interested in building? And then maybe we can work on some of those skills to be able to get you there, like those specific skills. Like if you want to tell stories, okay, well, we need to learn how to storyboard, right? And to learn to storyboard, we need to know like what a story arc is. And to know what a story arc is, maybe we should just like read some children's books. Like, so there's I think some parents, and sometimes I fall into this category, they'll listen to a conversation like this and they'll say like, y'all are talking in a lot of generalities. Play is great.
Yeah.
Maybe it's popular because people liked their kids to play, and maybe that's a good thing. But I would say that even though we're talking in a lot of general terms, a lot of broad brush, I think we can all give specific examples like the egg drop test, like video game design, where this actually gets into very specific lines of questioning with individual students.
And yeah.
So could you give me, and I'm sure you've had a lot of these experiences, let's give me a specific either hypothetical example or real memory you have of just kind of a silly or simple line of questions that has helped unlock a future for a child. Now that's like a heavy burden, but you know what I'm saying? Like, they didn't know they could do something. You asked them questions, and then they thought like, oh, well, wait, what about this? Have you ever had one of those experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's why I love being a science teacher. Was to help connect kids to just exposing them to lots of cool stuff that's in the world. And I think, the one important difference to connect this idea of what we're talking about now to the idea of play is that, play is fun and engaging. Learning can also be fun and engaging, but it does not itself need to be the like free form play that we were talking about. So where I do think play is a fundamental right, I would also clarify and say that not school doesn't need to be all play all the time, because at some point like you also need to learn how to read. Because if you can learn to read, then you can go learn how to do a bunch of other stuff that you actually also really have fun doing, that you can play with, on your own once you learn that skill set. But if you don't know something exists, you don't know, and you don't know what's possible. And that's where education definitely plays a really important role in facilitating the child's perspective of what is out there for them to explore. When we did, I did frog dissections. I love doing a good frog dissection. I did them with my eighth graders when I did eighth grade science. We did, I did them in high school bio again. We also did like fetal pigs. I did a sheep brain dissection. I love dissections. I did them here at our school with our fourth and fifth graders. And, you have kids who are curious about it. They've all kind of seen frogs. Mm-hmm. But they didn't, there's just lots of questions like what's inside there? What's different about a frog? Why does it do, why are they able to like catch things with their tongue? That was one of my favorite things. I'll spoiler alert. There's a reason why frogs can do that. But until you see it and you like have the frog in your hand, it's really hard to catch. But seeing kids like those, we call them light bulb moments. Like you could see the little ding, or back in the day, it'd be the the more you know star and rainbow.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. When you have moments like that, it unlocks a whole field of study for kids that they can get into. And so, you'll see it, and it's like this moment where a kid was, this was a couple months ago, and when we got back from Christmas break, and where we did the frog dissection, and students are like really quiet. They're just in there, and they're spending a lot of time just looking at the mouth. And it's because we had just talked about the tongue. So the tongue is hinged for a frog's tongue. If you lift up your tongue, you've got a little like thing that connects your tongue to the bottom of your mouth.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sort of in the back. And the lifty part of your tongue is in the front, like this. The frog's tongue, relative to its jaw, is hinged at the front. So they actually sling it outwards, and it's loose in the back to grab things and pull back. But when you get to look at it, and you can like pull the tongue back and forth and kind of like wiggle it.
I'm starting to feel a little bit gross, but this is cool.
Anatomy is not for everyone. It's good.
Right.
You're in your just right spot with history and coding, man.
Oh, that's great.
But having those moments where a kid can have that exploration, and some of the things I think you were speaking to are what we call inquiry-based learning, or these passion projects where, hey, I want to learn about storytelling, or I want to write my own comic book. I've got this project-based learning experience that needs to be facilitated, and that's something that we try to do here. A lot of it's a very progressive form of education, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning. These are all like 21st century skills because they help kids follow their passions and follow their interest, while also balancing the very real need to develop skills to get better at those things. So if you find that you have a love for nature, you can go out and spend all day in the woods, but eventually you're going to want to learn the names of some of those species that you're seeing, and you're going to want to learn more about the plants and the bugs, or the nitrogen cycle for how things are getting decomposed on the forest floor, things like that. And you need access to that information. The difference in the 21st century versus the 20th century is when you and I were in elementary school, almost virtually the sole source for that information was books.
Yeah.
And, you may have the odd video if it was on, like if you kind of caught PBS at just the right time of day, or if you were like, well, we didn't have cable growing up, so I just had like the 5 basic channels, right? And so you had to hope something was on at the right time and that you could see it, or you get a grown up to help you like work the VCR and tape it for you, and then you can watch it later, maybe. But now kids have access to all that information, and so the giving them any specific like set of knowledge is less critical than teaching them the skills they need to access that knowledge, to go out and know how to do research, and not just to like find videos on YouTube, but to make sure, hey, are you watching a video on YouTube that was made by like someone who legit knows what they're talking about, or is this just made by someone who's like figured out how to rack up views and add revenue and just generate content that may be really hit or miss? And that's a whole other skill, like that discerning between
that filtration.
Yeah.
I've often thought about this in terms of like just amount of information that's out there. It almost, it used to be you'd want to be a sponge, right? Like that kid, he's a sponge. He soaks up everything he runs into. That kid is crippled in 2021. There is you don't want to be that kid. Like you want to be a really, really, really good particle filter. You want to
be that kid with a filter. You want to have a filter. That kid needs a much bigger filter than they used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not to say let's get in an algorithmic silo, or let's filter out different perspectives. But in terms of like you were saying, is this somebody just wobble snorting on YouTube, or is this somebody who's credentialed, and then you have, the battle of credentials. An argument from authority isn't valid just on its own, so it has to be accompanied with things like logic,
Right.
and things like that. So
Yeah.
teaching the filtering skills, that's tough, and a lot of that's like soft skills, and a lot of it's hard skills combined, and being able to look for things like, does this person seem legit, like in trying to be discerning, and trying to give the benefit of the doubt in certain circumstances, and leveling your own banhammer in others. So yeah, that is the difficulty, I think, in today. And I think that's why a lot of the way that teaching happens in an antiquated manner is not interesting to kids, because I think back to my own elementary school experience in public school, and look, most kids weren't that interested, but I'll tell you, they were mostly interested, right? Like, they didn't have phones. There wasn't, there was the internet and video games, and they were excited to do that. But while at school, like, the most interesting things happening, was science class, were those things that we were learning. And the teachers almost had this position of like, hey, I'm in the position of having all the knowledge. I'm spending class, like, kind of bequeathing this knowledge to you, and then you're going to safeguard this knowledge and then go into the future, and because you have this knowledge, you'll get a job, or you'll be a productive citizen, or whatever. And now teachers are like, I have all this knowledge, which they do, they still have the knowledge, but then in communicating it, I don't think they have near the level of like innate interest, because they're like, I just think teachers are competing with like YouTube and Twitch and TikTok and instant gratification of like Amazon shipping and like all of these things.
Well,
so,
and this is the challenge, and we have to be careful though, because they said the same thing about TVs.
Sure. Oh, they did. Yeah, absolutely.
There are some great quotes about how, teachers of the future will no longer need to be versed in reading, writing, or arithmetic because of the television. We will, they envision like this screen in front of the kids, and kids like sitting there and just kind of downloading the information.
Sure.
And what amazing teachers do, and they do it every generation, is find a way of adapting and incorporating these new technologies, which can feel very overwhelming and prohibitive. But a really skillful teacher knows how to take those YouTube videos, knows how to take these sort of competing vies for attention from devices, and just bring it in and say, okay, I'm not going to fight force with force. I'm going to find a way of saying, if you're going out and you're wanting, our kids are working on like our fifth graders do a capstone project each year. Okay. They get to pick their own topic. They research it. They write a research paper, but they also have to like create a creative artifact that somehow represents a synthesis of their knowledge. And they have to do some original research just to teach them these skills. And so we incorporate the idea of like digital resources. We want them to actually go to the library and read books, like hard copy books. That's important. But then I want them going on YouTube, and their teachers show them how to navigate YouTube like safely and successfully to find, because we can see these things as rivals, but really they're just tools, and a tool can be used for good or evil. Right. And so our job as educators is to show kids, hey, these are the 21st century tools you have. You have access to a body of human knowledge like we have never had access to before. And some of that knowledge is really good and is amazing, and some of it is less amazing, and some of it's downright corrupt, and we need to be careful. And so I always go back, I'm a fan of John Dewey as a Deweyan educator.
Okay.
Education is not preparation for life. Education is life itself. And so it's no longer about, all right, I'm going to load you up with this information, then off into the world you go. The challenge in education now is to take the world that these kids live in, that is full of pandemics and climate change and poverty and like health crisis, like all of these really big challenges, and this access to this information and say, how do we work with you to navigate the world that you are growing up in right now?
Yeah.
And they teach, and teachers are rising to that challenge. And I think as an education leader, for me and my colleagues in this work, I think our challenge is to make sure that the teachers have the space they need to be able to do that, and kind of the freedom and autonomy to go on some of these bunny trails with kids sometimes, to not make sure, like, hey, it's 2:30 and you are supposed to be, this far into your math block right now, and you're not, and I'm gonna fuss at you about that. But to say, like, hey, if you're like legit using your kids' time to explore this deeper, more meaningful thing that's related to this other project that they're working on, that's a good use of time, I would say. Sure. I mean, they still need to learn math at some point, but we also have to trust kids that they'll learn it. I go back to what I said earlier, like, most kids can learn to do most things. Mm-hmm. And sometimes the answer to getting kids to learn reading and math is not more reading and math. It's actually, there was a really good study that came out a couple of years ago that talked about how knowledge and just general knowledge of things supports reading comprehension more than or can support reading comprehension as powerfully as explicit lessons in reading comprehension. Because it was a really nicely designed study. They I believe the example they used was baseball. And so they had a group of kids read a passage about baseball, and take like a standardized test style reading comprehension quiz over what baseball was like, what the passage was all about.
Sure.
Then they had another group of kids play baseball.
Yeah.
And so when they read the passage and had to take it, they way outperformed this other group of kids who had just the reading and then were kind of taught some of these comprehension skills, because they had a context for it. They knew what a shortstop was because they saw their friend be the shortstop.
Yeah.
Or, if there's a kid on first and a kid at home plate, is at bat, and they hit the ball, well, she knows she's where she's going to run to because she's been on first base. Like, her physically has been there, and so I think that speaks to what we could, the challenge in education leadership is just making sure we're seeing the forest through the trees and not honing in so much on this like pure skill development of it, but also taking time to make sure kids are getting exposed to lots of ideas, that they're not waiting on their teacher as a bottleneck of knowledge, but that their teacher is a facilitator of knowledge acquisition and isn't a conduit to provide a safe, healthy environment for kids to explore the world in all of its complexities.
Well, this has been really good. I feel lucky to have my own opinions validated, but also to get a little bit deeper into what really makes kids tick. I did want to ask, what are your, if you had to pick, either psychological or neurological influencers, would you say, are there any people that stand out? You said John Dewey for education. You said Piaget for psychological development. I think that should be a required reading for like parents, right? That stuff is really, really good. In general, Piaget was pretty great. Are there any others? Do you like hate certain ones? Like, there's Jordan B. Peterson. He's been like a huge kind of like a strange celebrity, but he's started talking just about, he's got a lot of really old clips on YouTube. He doesn't talk about it as much more because I think he's ventured a little bit more into politics, but where he talks about how play is essential and how he loves playing with kids and how that helps him learn how to balance and like wrestling actually makes kids smarter, instead of like, there's this preconceived notion that there are like a lot of dumb people in the gym, but the truth is that like the more that you exercise, the more that you're releasing what you said, like these growth factors for people. So are there people that you look up to that you think could be useful to look into if parents are a little bit more interested in going into the neurological literature?
Yeah, so this is a really broad and interesting place to go, and of course, because you asked for specific names, is the time that I like completely blank on
Right,
my
it's like
favorite
the
authors.
pressure.
But you know what I can do is actually I do have some books that I really like that I refer to pretty frequently,
Okay.
and I can email those to you. Maybe when you post it
put
up,
them in.
we can kind of like give a quick reading list. But you know,
We
think
can
one
put
of the
all that
things,
in the show notes for sure.
yeah. So I do have an education nemesis, and it doesn't come from a specific person, but it is a movement, and I like to get on my soapbox about it every chance I get.
Okay.
And since you just put one in front of me, I'm gonna climb right up on that soapbox, and that
Okay.
is the learning styles idea that like there are these. Usually, it's framed as like people. I'm a visual learner.
Visual,
really
auditory, or
auditory
kinesthetic learners. Yeah.
learner. Okay, so that's not true. It's not true. You're not. Most people, as primates, are visual learners. It is our primary sense modality for exploring the world. We are all of us visual learners. Even when you are learning, for people who are not sighted and they are learning to like read and write in Braille, that is processed in a visual association area of the brain because we're like if we were beagles, we would be like smell-based learners because that's one of their best sense modalities. But for us, it's vision. So we all learn visually. Anytime you can make a lesson really visually striking or visually powerful, you're going to help connect it with kids. That's why YouTube is such a great thing, right? Because you're teaching me about like how much cooler as a historian have history videos gotten now that CGI is better.
Yeah.
Right? Like it's no longer like, you know, this person that kind of looks like your uncle in, you know, a World War I like outfit going or you know, being part of Napoleon's army. Like they can recreate all of these battles and all of these scenes. You're like, oh, and you're just sort of tuned in. So we're visual learners. The other part of that research that's bunk is that, you know, there's different types of information that lend themselves to being learned in different ways. So when I was a karate instructor, for example, that's a kinesthetic task. I can talk all day to my students about how to throw a good side kick, or I can just show you a couple times visually. And then
this is an important distinction here. Oh, we almost ended this man's career on accident. But no. We don't show.
I can show you, but then you're going to do it, right? You're going to do it, and you're going to move your body, and then I'm going to come and I'm going to correct you several times, right? And you learn through the doing. And it's really that multisensory learning is what's important. We are also, and they have studied this line of thought specifically like, hey, are we good at distinguishing that? So they will give kids an assessment of like, you know, what do you prefer? Well, I'm self-assessing as I'm an auditory learner. You tell me anything and I can learn it. And then they teach them something in that sense modality, and then they give them an assessment. And the people who, you know, select one thing don't do any better than anyone else who had any other thing. Because we're just not, that's just not how it works.
Yeah.
There are certain tricks that can help learning, right? And in one of my, again, I blanked on the name of the author. There's a great book that I like called How We Learn. And it's a really good breakdown of just the general learning process. It talks about a few like pedagogical tricks that you know teachers can use, and also just people if you're wanting to study and get better at things, you know, for the sake of having that self-learning. So that there are definite tricks, but I always would that the VAK learning styles is still so pervasive in education.
It really blows me away, honestly.
What's that?
It blows me away that it's still so pervasive.
It's just, it seems so, like, I think we just really want it to be true. It seems like such a nice idea. And we can all come up with, like, kind of a, you know, confirmation bias to narrative for ourselves that will validate that. Like, oh, yeah, when this person, like, showed me this thing physically and I moved, I just got it. And like, well, you probably were, you know, having a lot of fun and you were really engaged and all these other things were true. correlation is not causation. So you're not. Anyway.
No, that's absolutely true.
That's my.
I would say the reason why stuff like that still permeates and is like more or less, what we call these days viral, and why it's resilient, is because, and again, this is just my guess, is we really want to be a part of a tribe, right? Like, so if we're like, oh yeah, I'm a kinesthetic learner, if you say something like that, it becomes like baked into your identity. And for you to like release that is not like, oh, like I updated my knowledge, my internal fact sheet, like my internal spreadsheet has been updated with this knowledge, I'll just move forward. They also have to like surgically remove part of their identity. Like, I never was a kinesthetic learner more than any other person. And, I admit there's got to be some variability, like in percentage points. I'm sure like some people are better learning like slightly, ever so slightly, maybe. But like, but if
what you're trying to learn.
Yeah, exactly. But if you're like, if as part of your identity, you have to then surgically remove that from your identity. I think that's harder than just to say like, oh, I've just updated my lens of the world. Like, we're good. Let's move forward. I like learning and I just like watching movies. So, great.
Yeah,
and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, and for everyone listening, just be liberated in knowing that you can learn to do most things.
Yeah.
You really can. Like, most people can learn to do most things. Some things are going to be harder to learn than others. It just depends on what your background knowledge is and how interested you are in that particular thing.
Which is why there are so many daggum competitive podcasts.
Yeah.
It's like, if I, just the fact that we're podcasting, like, this proves the point that, like, most people can do this thing. It's not that special if you have just like a microphone or like a silly green screen, right? I'm pulling back the curtain here. It's not that complicated. We're just having conversations. That's true. But yeah, and I guess and we've gone a lot of tangents. Maybe we'll split this up into 2 episodes. I don't know. This has been really, really great. But I butt up against this thought that this is another thing you hear in education, and you hear is like, every student is special and they've all got their unique abilities and they've all got their unique interests, and like they're just so special. And there's a part of that I just absolutely love, and then there's a part of that I vehemently hate, and there's like no middle ground. And I don't know if you feel similarly, or feel free to correct me, because I am open to new opinions and I am curious, which is part of the reason we have this podcast to begin with. The part that I vehemently hate, which is, the fun part, is like, actually, you're not that special. Like, you're not like born as a god. You're not born as like some, prodigy or whatever. Most of the time, there are these special cases, which actually is why they're special, and which is why we use the word special. But most people, most babies when they're born look like absolute potatoes, and then they start to look and develop like a human being. Like, it happened with my own son. Like, he was born, he was beautiful to me because I was his father, and I'm sure there's some like biological jazz going on. I could feel some kind of weird something happening in my head when I knew, I was like, he's not that cute, but like, I can't stop looking at him, kind of a thing. There's something biological there. But most babies look like potatoes. They develop into these beautiful kids that look, roughly speaking, like other kids. And I think, so what I love about that whole "you are special" thing is that I think what is trying to be expressed, but perhaps done in awkward words, is that you have innate value. And that is something that I completely agree with. Like, I believe that most people are smart. Everyone has value and worth, and nothing that you can do will take away from that like human potential and just worth as a human being. I think we should respect all individuals like that, really, and their rights. The right to own a gun or to speak freely or to play or whatever. Like, they have these rights, and I'm down protecting that. But I think when we tie someone's worth to their specialness, their special, not their speciality, but their like specialness, then they think they have to like invent special names for themselves and wear strange outfits and like, well, I'm so individualistic that like that's where my value is derived from. And I think it's perhaps more useful to derive value from the service that you render toward others, toward the things that bring you joy that you do. And they don't have to be unique, and sometimes they are. There's a guy that built like a battleship replica out of matchsticks. I'd say he's a fairly strange guy, and he's a little bit special in that he like did that out of glue and matchsticks.
Which is pretty cool.
It's massively cool. If you've ever seen it, we're gonna link to all sorts of stuff. But yeah, so do you come up against that in education? Or yes, I don't know. What do you think?
I do, and I think it where it really comes down to is when people want special treatment.
Okay.
And it has to do with like that idea of entitlement. So, and I think it's important to tease out, we are all human, and we're not all the same. There are people who have needs that other people don't have.
And this is true. This is true.
Yeah. And so I think there is a fundamental obligation in education to make sure that everyone's got their needs taken care of so that they can achieve their fullest potential. And it's kind of like it's into the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right?
Right.
I like to say you got a Maslow before you bloom. So you have to take care of your Maslow's base levels before you go up Bloom's taxonomy of thought. So if you want children to be able to like self-actualize, synthesize, and create, really like master their mind, we have to make sure that they're not going to school hungry, that they're having the accommodations met that they need to be able to learn how to read, to be able to keep track of their work, and to keep up with the teacher, and to keep up with the class, to make sure they feel safe and secure. And that's something that I think, that's a moving target. We're always trying to do that better. We're always trying to do more for more people. And I think that's good work. I think that's necessary work. I think what you were getting at that I see in sort of the shadow end of this difference is that I see this like with GT programs a lot, gifted and talented programs, and kids who are kind of academically high success, kids wanting to be treated differently by the system, or wanting to be feel entitled to some differences and like this exceptionalism. And there's a danger that can exist in those programs of creating a culture that says, hey, you're smarter than all these other kids, and so you don't have to follow the same set of rules or expectations. And I think that's not healthy.
Yeah.
I think too, we also, one of our biggest, there's a lot of things that we need to get better at in our system here in this country. Gifted and talented programs are one of those things that they're still so new, and we have not managed to repair a lot of the problems that are in those systems. And one of that is just access to those. I've worked in communities all over the city of Houston, from very affluent communities to communities of extreme poverty. There is not statistically any greater concentration of high IQ people living in these middle class, upper middle class communities than there are in communities where there is poverty. And the problem with our system is that we do a lot of this testing to get into those GT programs really, really early on. And then we don't test kids again. We don't kick anyone out of them. right? So, which isn't, because biologically you manifest the genetic components of your like intelligence,
Yeah.
intelligence is a loaded subject too. You could have a whole episode just on exploring that.
Yeah.
And the neurology and psychology of intelligence testing and all the different problems that exist in that. But with the information that we have, it does seem to indicate that you manifest your expressed intelligence during adolescence that will mirror that of your biological parents. So, kids who are adopted and grow up in a different environment than they may have with their biological parents will, express the intelligence as these things are measured when they're a teenager that will mirror less the environment they grow up in, but their early testing will mirror more closely the environment they're raised in. And so when you look at things like the achievement gap between high income and low income children, well, I mean, the children don't have the income at all, but their parents, right?
Right.
You see these.
See this kid like throwing newspapers like, I'm going to be the highest freaking achieving kid in this school.
Right. But
not that newspapers like exist like that, but
you'll have vocabulary deficits of thousands of words by the time they're in third grade. And that's not on the kid. That doesn't mean they're less smart. It just means they had fewer opportunities. And that's not fair. That's not fair to that kid. Ultimately, it's not fair to our society because we have this huge brain drain on ourselves. Like, there needs to be more of an effort of getting out and saying, like, if we're trying to find the people, like you're saying, like, there are some prodigy kids. There are some, like, our best and brightest. They're out there. But they're fairly evenly distributed across the social strata. And right now, we load those programs up with kids that are there mainly because of the income and education attainment of their parents, not because of like the innate capacity of that child. And it's a big problem for families. It's a big problem for education systems and in our country as a whole.
Yeah, and where you're talking about where it creates like a random, like a social class inside of a school, like a separation, like strangely. It is something that I found a little bit strange. But yeah, no, that definitely happens. Wow.
I think, sorry, you had brought up, I wanted to answer one question that you did. I think I kind of went at it in a roundabout way, but to go back to like, where is there a problem with like the exceptionalism? Mm-hmm. I think it goes back to this idea of like, when you perceive that your kid is like, well, they're so smart. Like, yeah, your kid's smart. I mean, they're probably averagely smart, but I think we underestimate the average intelligence of the average kid.
Yeah.
A lot of kids are very smart. People are capable of learning most things. Is that you're like, oh, but they're so smart. Why are they struggling here? It must be the teacher's fault that my kid can't learn math. Like, no, your kid is smart and they are currently bad at math. And we're trying to help them with that. Both of those things can be true.
Yeah. And so sometimes it takes time. Like, yeah. I think sometimes we forget this time feature. One of the issues that parents have signing up for like camps and things like that is understanding like the context. I think it's better understood in like music lessons where you understand your kid's not going to learn to play the piano in a week. Right. But some parents will still like assume that like a week of scratch is like, that's going to do it for him. Like, oh, they've done that. It's like, ooh, it's like,
yeah, I'll give you a heads up. My kid is also like this. We're signed up for one of these camps over the summer, and he's like fully expecting to be able to like create his own modded world with all of these different creatures. Just give you a heads up. You gotta really...
Well, good. I mean, and if he has practice, that might actually be an outcome, right?
Oh no, he's practiced none of this. He's ready to go to camp and learn it in a week. You can't do that? We can't do that in a week?
No. Yeah, so I'm actually happy to say no because we've had an hour and a half of context, which is not what I have with every parent who picks up the phone. But yeah, with this context, I think I'm happy to say no. But I'm also happy to say that like in 3 weeks you could totally do it on your own. With this head start, with the kind of the skeletal framework in place, the meat on the bones of practice at home and questions and things like that really help to flesh out the reality that he wants to see. So That has been great. I think we'll have to continue this conversation another time, Colin. This has been
I'd love
awesome. This has been really incredible. For parents who are interested, again, you're the head of school at St. Thomas the Apostle Episcopal School. Did I say it correctly?
That is correct. We're down here in the Clear Lake, like League City area. So we're actually right down
League
the street
City,
from
Fernwood.
NASA.
Yeah. So they're over there, but you can also reach out to him on LinkedIn. I think we'll maybe post that, and then we'll also try to post those links for any research. Maybe not all of it. There's a lot that you talked about, certainly, and the works of a lot of these teachers. This might be worth a double listen. I don't think I've ever said that before, but this one might be, and it certainly was a bunch of fun. At full disclosure, we are having summer camps at their campus this summer, so that is how we found each other in the first place. So I'm really glad we did. And I will say, please give us a review, subscribe if you can. And if you have anything that you'd like to learn as a parent in the future, let me know. We might be able to do a topic or a podcast on that topic. But until next time, thanks so much for listening. All right.